Sweden's Gotland Island, strategic island for NATO's Baltic strategy. Due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Sweden petitioned and became the 32nd member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, on March 7, 2024, and it abandoned its long-standing policy of military neutrality. The Swedish and Finnish accession to NATO has created the possibility of the Baltic Sea becoming a NATO lake and has made the Baltic region into the most likely flashpoint for a future NATO-Russo conflict. Shortly before and after its accession, Sweden has made a number of policy implementations, such as signing the Defense Authorization Agreement with the United States, increasing its defense budget for 2024 to 2% of its GDP, which is the NATO's target for member countries, and agreeing to deploy a battalion to Latvia in 2025 as part of a NATO multinational battle group. The most significant contribution that Sweden is going to make that can make the Baltic Sea into a NATO lake is the refortifying of Gotland Island off the Swedish eastern coast. Gotland Island is a Swedish island that is 78 miles long, 125 kilometers, and 32 miles wide, 52 kilometers, and has a total area of 1,200 square miles, or 3,200 square kilometers. Gotland is 50 miles, 80 kilometers, off the eastern coast of Sweden and 150 miles, 240 kilometers, from the Russian Baltic enclave of Kaliningrad. There's about 60,000 inhabitants on Gotland Island. In 2005, the island was demilitarized as tensions from the post-Cold War world influenced military decisions in the region. When Russia invaded Ukraine and seized Crimea in 2014, the Swedish government decided to reintroduce a small contingent back to the island consisting of 370 soldiers in 2018. In January 2022, a month before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Sweden decided to bolster the garrison on Gotland. After the Russian invasion, Sweden announced that $163 million would be spent on improving the military infrastructure on the island, including a significant increase in barracks space on the island to permanently house a larger garrison. The Swedish government understands that control of the island is important to the defense of the Baltic region and greatly increases NATO's strength in the eastern Baltic. This is a fact that Russia is aware of, and Russian press has publicized the Russian view of the importance of seizing the island either part of or after an invasion of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. The Russians currently have two significant locations in the Baltic region, one at St. Petersburg and the other at the Kaliningrad enclave. The Russian strategy is for Kaliningrad to be the primary location to conduct anti-access aerial denial strategy in the Baltic. This would allow Russians to contest the coast and the airspace over the NATO Baltic countries of Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, as well as parts of Poland and Sweden. Kaliningrad allows the Russians, at a minimum, to deny NATO dominance in the area and could possibly isolate its easternmost member Baltic states and Finland. The Russian capture of Gotland Island would allow it to extend its A2AD deeper into the Baltic and would isolate the Baltic region by denying NATO free access in the airspace or waters. Russia would be able to use Gotland to contest the airspace in the Baltic Sea and launch deeper strikes in the Baltic region, impacting all of Scandinavia, Poland, and most of Germany. NATO, even before Sweden joined the alliance, knew that Gotland Island is the linchpin to transform the Baltic Sea into that NATO strongpoint, but the loss of it, the Russians could split the NATO region and allow Russians to isolate NATO states and defeat and neutralize them in detail. A strong NATO presence in Gotland would allow NATO to bottle up St. Petersburg from operating effectively in the Baltic and isolate and neutralize Kaliningrad, and allow for NATO to have a sea route to supply the eastern NATO states and give NATO a forward air base to dominate the entire Baltic region. The NATO leadership has identified the potential vulnerability of Gotland Island, and Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson has stated that the fortification of Gotland Island will be a priority to be discussed with NATO leadership. Russia, as expected, have denounced the plans and have accused NATO of turning the Baltic Sea into an, quote, an arena of geopolitical confrontation, end quote, and that the move is a threat to the navigation and the economies in the region. Russia added that it would evaluate the situation on Gotland Island and would evaluate its options. The priority of Gotland defenses is to first bolster the garrison to prevent Russia from seizing it quickly or easily, such as the operation like the Russian seizure of Crimea. During and shortly after the Cold War, Gotland Island had a garrison of up to 25,000 soldiers, but today only has a small armored contingent, including Leopard 2 main battle tanks and personnel carriers, but only about 370 soldiers. The important steps to bolster the garrison are underway with the goal of fortifying the island from the Russian invasion. Future discussions by Sweden's Prime Minister includes adding submarine operations from Gotland as well as surveillance capabilities in the region. The Defense Authorization Act that was signed between the U.S. and Sweden does not authorize permanent stationing of U.S. forces in Sweden, but does allow for the pre-positioning of equipment and U.S. access to designated deployment regions. This will allow the U.S. to rapidly deploy onto the island if events call for such a decision. In September 2023, the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps participated in a German-led exercise called Northern Coast 2023 in the latest exercise in the Baltic region. The Marines deployed a MEU, a Marine Expeditionary Unit, to support the exercise, so the use of Marines is envisioned as an option to bolster both offensive and defensive capabilities on the island. The deploying of a MEF, a Marine Expeditionary Force, which is larger than a unit, to Gotland was practiced by the United States Marine Corps in 2022 and will be an option to open up the defense of the island as well as assistance from NATO countries. Sweden, as the newest member of NATO, is rapidly focusing on bolstering its defenses against potential Russian threats in the region. The Russian counter that the Swedish and NATO decisions are provocative to a non-existent threat. Russia says that it will be required to reevaluate its options in the Baltic Sea to keep it from becoming, quote, a NATO lake, end quote. Russia's statements ignore the fact that Russia routinely violated Swedish and Finnish sovereignty in the Baltic Sea, including a simulated aerial bombing run on Stockholm in 2022, which required NATO air intervention, and again in 2022, 4 Russian fighters violated Gotland Island airspace during a joint Finnish-Swedish exercise. Now with Sweden as a member of NATO, the stakes are much higher if the Russians continue to flagrantly violate Sweden's sovereignty. Sweden has taken the prudent steps to bolster NATO's position in the region, but it is also clear that NATO is shaping what will most likely be a flashpoint of any future conflict with Russia.